Okay, we'll be covering Chapter 5, Communications and Documentation. The standard competencies of the National EMS system use simple knowledge of the EMS system, safety, well-being of an EMR, and medical and legal issues at the scene of an emergency while awaiting higher level of care. We'll be going over some things, documentation, recording your patient findings in your patient care report, part of the EMS communication, how to call for additional resources, how to transfer your patient either to another transporting EMS unit or at the hospital to hospital staff, and their interaction within your team. And then also therapeutic communications. We'll take a look at the principles of communicating with patients in a manner that achieves a positive relationship, and then interviewing techniques. And this kind of falls into your patient assessment and history taking as well. And then we will be covering some medical and anatomic terminology through this presentation as well. So communication is important. So dispatchers must communicate the location and the type of call to the responders, you. EMRs need to communicate with patients, bystanders, family members, dispatchers, and other members of the public safety community. And then after a call, you must document the condition of the patient and your treatments that you administered. The purpose of communication system is to send information from one location to another when it is impossible to communicate face-to-face. A lot of times this is done either over the radio or by telephone or cellular phone. The results of using a communication system will be only as accurate as the information that is put into the system. Typically, it's verbal communication when it's pre-hospital. After post-call or post-dispatch, when you're doing your patient care report, then we put things into writing. Communication systems can be divided into two categories, those that transmit voice and those that transmit data. Data can be transmitted through radios, phones, or the internet. Paging systems can transmit text messages or voice communications. And then you have MDTs, or mobile data terminals. They transmit data messages through a radio system. Fax machines, which aren't on ambulances, but they use phone lines or radio systems to send written data. And then you have telemetry, is used by advanced life support providers to transmit EKGs or ECGs and other patient data to online medical control. Locally in this region of Western North Carolina, typically the only time that we do that is to transmit our EKGs to the hospital. Digital messaging is a technology that includes email, text, messages, and social media, which are increasingly used by EMRs to send and receive information within public safety agencies. It's actually more or less become a mainstay for the vast majority of EMS systems. So functions of radio communications. First, we have dispatch. Dispatch may be by voice over the radio, maybe a text message, or an MDT to alert responders of an emergency, or a combination of all three, or even just two of them. With my fire department, I get paged out on a radio, and then I also receive text messages and messages through an app. Some other agencies that I volunteer with and work with is the same thing. We have apps, different apps. We have CADs and other MDTs that we receive our pages through multiple channels. It is your responsibility to keep your equipment ready to receive a call when you're on duty, keeping it on, or the volume turned up to where you can hear transmissions. If you're not sure that all information has been received, just ask. It's an open line of communication. If you need information, just ask. The response to a scene. Learn how to use maps or GPS or those apps that redirect you to your GPS programs. Dispatchers a lot of times can give you further information or even turn-by-turn directions over the radio. And if you are delayed or encounter any problems, notify dispatch. If you come to a set of railroad tracks and there's a train going by, notify them so that there's a timestamp and a recording of that delay. Or a flat tire, or if your radiator goes out in your ambulance, things like that, or your fire truck. You have mechanical issues. Another reason that you might be delayed is you might witness an injury or an accident, and you might have to stop because you witnessed it. Doesn't mean that you have to be taken off that call, but you can provide that initial care until other responders can be dispatched. Okay, so once you get there, you arrive at the scene. You want to perform your windshield survey or your visual survey of the scene. Give Communications Center a brief verbal description of the scene, your scene size up, location and type of incident, any hazards present. Do you see any fluids leaking out on the ground, any smoke, electrical hazards, hanging wires, things like that. How many patients do we have? Is it just one, or is this possibly a mass casualty? Any additional resources that you might need. How many ambulances, how many more fire departments, do you need a wrecker, things like that, or a tow truck. Update your responding EMS units. Your report to them should include age and sex of the patient, their chief complaint, level of responsiveness, status of their airway, breathing and circulation at minimum. And then transferring care to other EMS personnel. Provide them with a handoff report if you can. If you can't do it on a written notepad like this, you can give them a verbal one, or write it down on a piece of paper that they already have in their ambulance, something that they can take with them. You want to use the same approach you followed during your initial patient assessment when you're transferring your patient care to EMS providers. Age and sex of the patient, the history of the incident, why you're there, patient's chief complaint, what's wrong with them, their level of responsiveness, how you found the patient, their vital signs, their airway status, breathing, circulation, results of your physical examination, any pain that you might have found while palpating, or other injuries that may not be easily seen, any pertinent medical conditions using your sample format, report interventions provided, and the patient's response to them. I put a tourniquet on, the bleeding stopped. I put a tourniquet on, the bleeding did not stop. Direct pressure, bleeding stopped, didn't stop. Online medical control is generally used by EMTs and paramedics to secure permission to perform certain skills that are not out of their standing orders or their standing protocols. They get direction regarding patient care and give patient care to reports to the hospital. So after your run is done, you have turned over care of your patient, you need to report it. And you need to report your status to the communications center. Let the communications or dispatch know how long it will take you to get your unit ready for service and when you will be available for another call. A lot of agencies and departments will actually have a set time frame that dispatch will kind of leave you alone. 20 minutes is kind of like a very common time frame, so after 20 minutes the dispatch may actually call you and check on you. If you know it's going to be longer than that set time frame, it's a good idea to just go ahead and key up your radio and tell them that you're going to be delayed at the hospital, delayed for decon, or what have you. So verbal communications. Effective communication means that the person's receiving the message understands exactly what the person who sent the message meant. It requires feedback. The receiver needs to communicate to the sender that the message has been received. This is considered closed loop communication. Both external and internal distractions can negatively affect communication. Things such as noise or use of electronic devices, and are letting yourself think about a personal matter while on scene or being distracted. Some guidelines for effective communication with patients. Respect the cultural norms of that patient. Use open-ended and closed-ended questions appropriately. We don't want to lead them down a path of giving us information that may not be accurate about their current condition. Treat them all your patients as if they were members of your family, or how you would want members of your family to be treated if they were in a similar situation. Introduce yourself by name and title. Ask for the patient's name and use it. Make eye contact and keep eye contact. Use language the patient can understand. Sometimes there is a language barrier, and you may have to get somebody to help you interpret. Speak slowly and clearly. Raising your voice and yelling at a patient because they can't understand you or you can't understand them is only going to exasperate frustration. Tell the truth. If you don't know something, be honest and just tell them that you don't know. Allow time for a patient to respond. Limit the number of people speaking with the patient and be aware of your body language. You don't want to come across as intimidating or dominating by standing over top of someone. You want to have more of a casual, relaxed demeanor. Act and speak in a calm and confident manner. As part of emergency services, once we arrive on scene, that emergency should be ending. We are the solution to that emergency. Patients who are hard of hearing or even deaf, show them your name badge or your patch. Touch the patient. Get in front of them where that they can see you, and face them squarely when you're speaking so that they can see your mouth move. Speak slowly and distinctly. There's no need to shout. They can't hear you. Watch the patient's face for expressions of understanding or uncertainty. Repeat or rephrase your comments in clear, simple language. And if everything else fails, write down your questions, or you can use a text and let them read it. I actually had a patient one time that I could not communicate with. There was a language barrier, and we ended up using our phones to text message each other back and forth, and it automatically translated for us. So we did our whole patient assessment and transport communicating through text, even though we were sitting side by side. It was kind of cool. Patients who are visually impaired, tell the patient what is happening, identify or give them warning that there's going to be loud noises or bangs, clangs, jostles. Describe the situation and the surroundings. Find out the patient's name and use it throughout your examination of the patient. If the patient has a service dog, try to keep the patient and the dog together. It is not necessary to talk louder. With service animals, typically they are allowed to accompany the patient. Give the hospital a heads up that that's what is occurring. The only time that a service animal can be refused transport by EMS is if it's causing a danger or a threat to EMS personnel or a health hazard. So non-English speaking patients, determine how much English the patient speaks, if any, and try to find an interpreter. Supplement your questions with hand gestures, finger pointing, facial expressions. And then geriatric patients, do not assume that older patients have physical or mental impairments. Some of them are as sharp as a tack, and some of them are even sharper than you are. Assess all patients carefully and give them time to respond to your questions. If you want to frustrate and exasperate that frustration faster than anything, is cutting off somebody before they have a chance to speak. Pediatric patients, their familiar objects and faces can help reduce fear in children, like a teddy bear or a favorite toy. Talk to both the parents and the children as much as possible and tell them what is happening. Explain the processes and give them warning about things that you're going to do. Ask the parent to hold the child if illness or injury permits. And then tell the child your first name and explain what you are doing. Squat, kneel, or sit down to the child's level. so you can be eye to eye with them to establish that eye contact, and be honest. Children can be excellent judges when it comes to honesty. Patients with a developmental disability, ask family about the patient's typical level of communication. Is this their baseline normal? Speak slowly. Use short sentences and simple words. You may need to repeat or rephrase statements several times until the patient understands what you want. So persons displaying disruptive behavior. Assess the situation. Try to determine the cause of the patient's disruptive behavior. Protect the patient and yourself. Stay between the patient and an exit. Always keep yourself a way out. Do not take your eyes off the patient or turn your back. If the patient has a weapon, stay clear or retreat. Wait for law enforcement to take over the scene and ensure scene safety. As soon as your personal safety is assured, carry out the appropriate emergency medical care, and you cannot take a disruptive patient to the hospital against his or her will or wishes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about medical terminology. There's a collection of medical terms or technical terms used by medical personnel to identify anatomic parts of the body, specify illness and injuries, indicate treatments given. Your job as an EMR is to communicate your message to other medical professionals as clearly as possible. Do not use medical terms if you are unsure of what they mean. As new terminology is introduced, look at parts of each word and learn commonly occurring prefixes and suffixes. So we have over here a list like Brady, used in bradycardia, which means slow, or tachy, or tachypnea, or tachycardia, means rapid or swift. Therm, in relation to quantities of heat or temperature. Hypo is below or underneath the normal level or deficit. Naso, denoting the nose. And then oro for the mouth. Arterio, relationship to an artery. Cardio, heart. Hem, hema, or hemo, usually is used in reference to blood. Documentation is a process for verifying your actions using written or computer-based records. Proper documentation includes age and sex of your patient, the history of the incident, condition of the patient when found, patient's description of illness or injury, their chief complaint, patient's level of responsiveness, status of initial and subsequent vital signs, results of your physical examination, pertinent medical conditions using your sample format or sample history, and treatment or interventions that you gave to the patient. Any change in the patient's condition, agency and personnel who took over the treatment, the following times we were dispatched, arrived on scene, made patient contact, when other departments or providers arrived on scene, when you left the scene, any reportable conditions that you found, any infectious disease exposure, anything unusual about the case, and any other helpful facts. Complete your patient care report as soon as possible after each call. A lot of organizations and departments have time limits or time frames that you have to have your PCRs completed, and they rely on PCRs for documenting reportable events as well. So in summary, we covered the communication system and how it allows you to relay information from one location to another when it's impossible to communicate face-to-face. Excellent communication skills are crucial during every phase of the call. Try to avoid using slang or jumbling your words or slurring your words. Nowadays, 10 codes are kind of on the outs. We've moved to plain talk. Plain talk being plain proper talk. You must have a basic idea of how your department communications systems work. Be familiar with two-way radio communications and have a working knowledge of your mobile and handheld portable radios, when to use them, and what information you can and cannot transmit or should not transmit. Communication systems are useful for different functions. The phases of an EMS call include the dispatch, response to the scene, arriving at the scene, updating EMS units, transferring care, and then your post-run activities, or clearing the call. It is important that you learn and follow the standard procedures and protocols used by your department for communications. In addition to radio and oral communications, you must have excellent person-to-person communication skills. Body language and attitude are very important and can make or break in patient interaction. Take special care of individuals such as children, geriatric patients, hearing and visually impaired patients, non-English speaking patients, developmentally disabled patients, and persons displaying abnormal behavior. Along with your radio report and oral report, you must complete a formal handwritten handoff report that will be given to other EMS professionals at the scene. Remember, the call is not over until the paperwork is completed. So, in review, we've got a couple questions. When communicating with a sick or injured person, it is important to A, use terms such as dear or buddy when addressing the patient. Only use medical terminology. Ask the patient as little as possible, or maintain eye contact with the patient when you can. When communicating with a sick or injured patient, it is important to take a second to look those over. So the answer is going to be D, maintain eye contact with that patient when you can. Next question, which of the following would be considered good communication? A, you talk louder so you can be heard over the television. B, you initiate care without telling the patient what you are doing. C, you assess the patient while thinking about your last call. Or D, you minimize distractions during your conversation with the patient. Answer to that one is going to be, again, D, you minimize distractions during your conversation with the patient. When caring for a pediatric patient, you should consider which of the following? A, separating the child from the parents to avoid upsetting them. Or B, speaking in an authoritative tone. C, allowing the parent to hold the child if the situation permits. And then, or D, performing painful procedures without giving the child any warning at all. Okay, and the answer for that is C, allowing the parent to hold the child if the situation permits. Okay, so that's all we have for Chapter 5. Next, we'll be going over Chapter 6. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can always email me or the lead instructor of the class, either email or in the group chat with questions or comments. Until next time, we'll see you later.